Frank Isola, Woody Page, Mina Kimes. Magic Johnson tweeted Chris Paul to the Lakers, and everybody laughed because that's so magic. Pablo Torre brought it up on this show yesterday, and that's basically the same thing. But could Paul to the Lakers make sense? And what's the deal with Texas and Oklahoma and the SEC? Let's go.
Whew.
Man, you can yell my name out. Very subdued.
Let's call it Nick Frank.
Yep.
The NFL is going where I think no professional league has yet to go. If you can't get your team to prevent a COVID outbreak and can't get your team on the field, you forfeit. NFL informing teams today they won't add an extra week to the back end of the season or any part of the season. If you can't get your team on the field during the week of play, it's a forfeit. Mina Kimes, what type of implications does this have, and could this have?
Well, Tony, the NFL isn't telling players they have to get vaccinated, but the NFL is telling players they have to get vaccinated. And that's been their approach to all of this from the beginning, for months now. You might remember the league coming out and saying, if you don't get vaccinated this season, you basically have to live life like you did in 2020, showing up early, wearing the mask, getting tested on a regular basis, and talking to folks around the league. That was a real incentive for players and employees to get the shot. I think it's a big reason why, according to the NFL, 75% of players already have one shot, which is a fairly high level of compliance already. Now, here comes this added incentive or punishment. It's a disincentive, really, because, man, you do not want to be the unvaccinated player, and it's only unvaccinated players that causes an outbreak and causes your team not only to forfeit a game, but causes players on both sides to lose money. I think that rate, that 75% rate, is going to continue to shoot up. And I wouldn't be surprised if other leagues look at the NFL, see how they're approaching it, and take on a similar tactic, because it is working.
Just to put a finer point on what you just said, can you repeat that, Mina? That if there is a forfeit and both teams don't play, both teams don't get paid. The team, even if they're up to everything is fine with one team, Pittsburgh Steelers, I believe, were in this situation a couple times last year. Go ahead, Mina.
Yeah, but I want to repeat the key distinction here. The outbreak has to be caused by an unvaccinated player, because there have been some cases where vaccinated athletes do test positive for COVID and spread it. The result, of course, as we see across the country, is that if you are vaccinated, you're less likely to get sick. But the NFL is drawing that distinction. If that happens, you're not going to see this same sort of punitive measure. How they'll determine that, I don't know.
Thanks for your reporting there. Woody Page will bring you in here. Here in the NFL, it said forfeit if you can't get your team to prevent a COVID outbreak.
Hearing that earlier today, I thought it was a significant story. NFL is using every kind of motivation to get players to vaccinate. They don't want to go through what the situation was last year when they were playing on Tuesdays, when they were pushing games back to later in the season. That's not going to happen, as best as I can tell from what this decision is. And as Mina brought up, I immediately thought of Cole Beasley, who has been very prominent in saying he's not going to get the vaccination. Do you want to be a player that not only could cost your team a game, but also a spot in the playoffs if it's a good team? So I think it's going to have a profound effect on the entire NFL in terms of teams like the Chargers and the Colts and the Washington football team and the Cardinals, who don't have 50% of their players vaccinated at this point.
Frank Isola, let's bring you in here too. And just to draw a parallel here, in Major League Baseball, they haven't gone this far, and we saw the Yankees-Red Sox game postponed just last week.
Yeah, fewer games though. So you could play 162. A team could maybe play 158. You could play double headers, of course, as well. The incentive here is going to be money, and we all know that. You're going to get the players' attention. But Mina mentioned how many players are vaccinated. If you're not vaccinated by this point, chances are you're not going to get vaccinated. We know the way professional athletes are. I'll use two as an example. Tom Brady, LeBron James. All we ever hear about is how much money and what the care that they put into their bodies. There's a lot of athletes that are going to say, you know what, I'm not taking this. I don't care what you say. My team's going to have to forfeit. If you're at this point, and I think if you haven't been vaccinated, I don't think what the NFL is saying now, it might get some players. It's not going to get 100%. Let's be fair.
Wow, Frank. Jackie Mack, anything you'd like to address here on the NFL statement, or maybe what Frank or Mina or Woody just said?
Well, I don't think the goal, Frank, I mean, of course the goal is always 100%, but I can't imagine that's what the NFL believes will happen. I think they just want to have enough teams that have that 85% or higher vaccination point, which I believe more than half the NFL teams are already at that point, Tony. So the incentive is there, of course. Peer pressure, don't ever underestimate peer pressure, especially with social media in play. Just think about it. If you know of the player that was unvaccinated that caused, and you're the opponent, and you find out he's the reason your game was canceled and you just lost a paycheck, I can only imagine the fury that's going to come out on social media. I do have one question, though, and I don't know it. I'm not a lawyer, never pretend to be one. I wonder if someone will take this to court. If this is the place where we find about the legality of vaccination versus people who are not vaccinated. I kept wondering about this with sporting events. If an airline was ever going to say you can't come on our plane without proof of vaccination, I'm curious to see if anyone will put this to the legal test.
That's a very good question, and that's a question that people in sports and outside of sports are dealing with in their own place of employment.
Right.
Another question I would have, and I'm not sure if there's an answer to this yet, Mina, this statement just came out today, is what is a COVID outbreak? How many players are we talking about? Is it 3? Is it 5? Does it get decided midweek by the NFL?
Yeah, I assume they're going to lean on some of the, norms that were created last season. And also, by the way, we should note the NFLPA and the NFL agreed last season to the possibility of forfeited games. However, this new twist is the NFL saying, well, we're not going to add on an extra week to this already long season. So we'll see how the NFLPA reacts to that. But Tony, I don't know. This is all very touch and go. Don't touch and go. And I have to think that the NFL is just hoping that the threat of all of this is enough to get teams over that 85%.
The norm is there is no normal. What do you have a last word? I see you shaking your head, please.
I was just going to say, being in Denver and watching the situation with the Broncos last year when they didn't have a quarterback.
Yeah, that's what the league's trying to absolutely avoid. You're right, Woody. Among other things, among the safety, of course, first and foremost.
That was their fault, though. Mm-hmm. But that was Denver's players. They didn't practice the norms that were set out for them, the regulations.
Thing about this, Jackie, right? Should this happen to a game, one team is going to theoretically be guilty here. A group of players, a group of coaches, whoever it is. It could be for reasons that were, oh, my kid was at school and there was an outbreak and now passed it on to family, or it could be from reckless behavior. Last word, Mina.
Well, the Denver example is a great one, Woody, because if those players were vaccinated, as now they have the ability to be, they could come back. They could test and come back. And so I think it's a great example of you won't have that situation again if players get the shot.
That's a good point. Last thing on this. Does anybody know the score that the NFL puts for a game that is forfeited? Woody, do you know the score? I'm putting you to the test right now.
I thought it was 1-0, and it used to be, and it is in college sports, but it's 2-0.
There you go, Woody. You did all that research. We'll give you a chance. 2-0, yeah. All right, we've been horned. Here's a story that's not too far from this. Pac-12 Media Day is upcoming. Washington State head coach Nick Rolovich will be there remotely. Here's why. I've elected not to receive a COVID-19 vaccine for reasons which will remain private. While I have made my own decision, I respect every individual decision coaches, staff, student, athletes make on their own regarding the vaccine. So he said after that, I will not comment further on my decision. Woody, this is the same question, but I'll ask it to you in this way. For the Washington State program, do you think this will have an effect on Rolovich's coaching?
Absolutely. I mean, you're talking about a coach that's going to have to, based on what the president of the university says, he's going to have to adhere to protocols. That means he's got to wear a mask on the sideline. He's got to wear a mask at practice, talking to players. He's got to be 6 feet away. Can you imagine a college football coach calling his quarterback over? He has to stay 6 feet away while he talks to him about what's going on in the game. I think it's going to be just a confusing situation for Washington State. And for him to say, I'm not going to comment on it anymore. Here's a coach coming out saying he's not going to get a vaccine. Okay, if you want to do that, but you got to explain, I think, to the fans there, to the players, and if he does it privately, we'll probably find out, but he needs to explain it to the reporters too. And I'm one of them, and I would keep asking him until he got up and walked out, I guess.
Frank Isola.
Yeah, and somebody asked Mike Leach that same question. He said, if I'm vaccinated or not vaccinated, I'm not going to tell you. So I think that's the situation a lot of people are going to be in. And what's interesting is the president of the school came out and he says he fully expects every student, faculty, staff to be vaccinated. Then in the same statement, he said, but we also respect an individual, their right to choose whatever they want to do. I don't really think it's going to impact them all that much in terms of coaching. Every coach went through it last year. I just think he sticks out as a guy that is saying that he's not getting the vaccine and I'm still going to coach and it's basically none of your business.
Jackie McMullen.
But it is interesting, and you mentioned the president. You've put a lot of people, the president, the athletic director, and your own players in an untenable position. You're not going to talk about it at all, but you don't think there's one single player on that team that's going to say, I'm not going to talk about this. Of course they are. They're kids. They're going to get emotional about it, either positively or negatively, or just very innocently answering the questions that are asked of them. So this is going to cause a little bit of a distraction. How much, it's really hard to say. If the team goes on and doesn't have to forfeit any games or cancel any games, that will certainly be in Rolovich's favor.
And Mina Kimes.
Last year they did.
Well, to Frank's point, I actually do think it affects your ability to coach. Hearing from players and coaches, at least in the NFL side, wearing masks in the building, it's harder to communicate. And so, it affects his ability to do his job. But look, if you're not going to do it for the public health reasons at a moment when cases are surging in Washington state and the vast majority of people who are getting sick are unvaccinated, do it for competitive ones. Just the other day, Nick Saban, of all people, was touting his team's 90% vaccination rate publicly. Nick Saban, the ultimate competitor, is doing that because he will do everything in his power to win football games. And frankly, if you're a coach who's not doing that, you aren't.
Thank you for that, Mina Kimes. That'll be the last word. Taking a break right here. Buy ourselves on the other side. Yes, the report about Texas and Oklahoma bolting to the SEC. That's next. And that's all I'm going to say about that.
Around the Horn is brought to you by Liberty Mutual Insurance. Only pay for what you need.
Could Texas and Oklahoma leave the Big 12 for the SEC? It's a bombshell of a report from the Houston Chronicle. Brent Zwernemans cited an unnamed college official. He said the schools have approached the SEC about jumping aboard, could make an announcement in a couple weeks. There have been denials by both schools, but reporting today from Dennis Dodd, CBS Sports, that Big 12 ADs and presidents are meeting tonight to debrief about this because they were all blindsided by it. Mina, can you see Texas and Oklahoma leaving for the SEC? And what impact would that have on college sports?
I mean, this would change college sports forever as we know it. I realize that sounds dramatic, but I think it's accurate. It would leave the Big 12 in shambles. We're talking about two of the most prominent programs, most successful in Oklahoma, leaving. And if you're a fan of those teams, do you want to join the SEC and reduce your chances of making even an expanded playoff? The only winner here really is the wallets of these programs because this is all about money and nothing else.
Woody Page, can you see this happening? Texas and Oklahoma leaving for the SEC.
Yes, I do, and I think it would have just an incredible influence on the NCAA, which could go away. This would be a super league, the first time that would actually be happening with 16 teams that could be divided into 4 divisions, actually. And Mina, I think more teams from the SEC are going to be in the 12-team playoff. That's what they're looking for. And I think legislators in both Texas and Oklahoma have talked in the past when they talked about going to the Pac-12 that they had to take Texas Tech and Oklahoma State with them. That's not happening at all.
You know, Woody, let me just rewind for a second. You said something very intriguing to me, the Super League. Remember this story from soccer, global soccer, Frank? Of course you do, from months ago. And what was the response to that? Everybody was up in arms like, you can't take away what I grew up with. Go ahead, Frank Isola.
Yeah. And their domestic leagues, whether it was in Italy or in England, they want to punish those teams, like Liverpool and Manchester United that wanted to leave to form the Super League. You know, the one thing is, remember now, Texas A&M, they want to be the lone SEC team in Texas. But I got to believe, because Texas football, as we know, is a whale. And I don't think this story it's gaining a lot of traction. There's got to be a lot behind it. And I'll tell you another thing, too. You get Oklahoma, you get Texas going there. The SEC is already the power. I mean, where is everybody else going to be playing for? It's like every year the champion's going to come out of that conference. It's crazy.
Jackie Mack, can you see this happening?
But here's the difference between the soccer scenario and this scenario. Who's the one that's going to be putting the hammer down on these teams? The NCAA is at its weakest and most vulnerable point in the history of the organization. So who's the one that's going to put the hammer down, Frank? Here's the other thing. Don't think all these other leagues are going to sit idly by if this happens. If this happens, do you think the ACC is going to say, oh, wow, there's a lot of those teams. I guess we won't do anything? No. Then you'll have another super team on the other
Well,
end.
could the Big 12 possibly survive without Texas and Oklahoma? I mean, can't you see?
No.
I mean, all those other teams would be parsed up. And
Kansas
we've
basketball.
seen this in recent years, the whole juggling of conferences, but this feels different if it were to be Texas and Oklahoma going to the SEC. Wow. What a bombshell. We'll move on. Buy or sell two. Yermin Mercedes saying it's over. He was the AL Rookie of the Month of April. He was demoted by the White Sox last month, and he's been in the minors since. Clearly unhappy. The words in the post are tough to read. Apologizing to those he let down, talking about the fruit of his immaturity and the humans he failed. So there's that. Maybe much of that we don't know behind the scenes. But we also know this. Tony La Russa talked about adjustments the league made on Mercedes, and he needs to adjust to that. And then there are more dots to connect. June Lee pointed this out directly on Twitter. Yermin Mercedes, before he hit a 3-0 homer off Williams Studio, and Tony La Russa publicly condemned him. 344, 6 home runs. After 190, 1 home run. Correlation doesn't always equal causation, but, Frank, are you making that jump?
No, I'm not going to, because I think when you look at his career, he's played 632 career minor league games. He's played 69 games in the majors. He is what he is. He's a career minor league player who, guess what, will have an opportunity to come up. I think he's giving up on himself way too soon. September 1st, you call up, you're on a team that, by the way, has got the best record in the American League.
Jackie McMullen.
So I think this is a young kid. I know he's 28, but in my mind, that's still a young guy that's gone through a major disappointment and to some degree, a major public humiliation. I don't think it necessarily has to be over for him. Tony La Russa's already said he's going to reach out to this young player and to try to see if he can tell him, look, we haven't given up on you. I think this is just, to me, another example of a public mental health crisis that we're all watching in real time. The pressure on these athletes is enormous.
Nina, do you believe this is in part because of the benching and the condemnation from his manager 2 months ago?
I don't think you can draw that connection explicitly. It's a complicated story. As Frank pointed out, he struggled at times before that. But I do think La Russa making that statement and not taking the side of his team opened himself up to criticism like this, fairly, down the road. And it's something he has to own because it's something he did.
Woody Page.
He didn't say he was retiring permanently. He's stepping away from the game. I hope that his teammates with the White Sox will reach out to him, his family and his friends. And I think if he does take some time away and looks inward at his career and his personal life, he'll be okay and come back.
Frank Isola, Jackie McMullen, thank you for your thoughts and words today. Mina, yes, we had a joke at Magic Johnson and Pablo Torre's expense earlier in the show about Chris Paul and the Lakers. Because that's what you people do. You always bring up the Lakers whenever anybody has a potential opt-out. Or the Knicks, Frank Isola. I'm looking at you. And yet, those are the two teams people are trying to get Chris Paul linked to. He's got the contract opt-out this summer. Mina Kimes, Woody Page, welcome to Showdown. Can you honestly see Chris Paul leaving the Suns? Could it happen with the Lakers over the Knicks, Mina?
I don't. I mean, the Lakers make sense for friendship reasons and competitive ones, but they don't make sense for financial ones. Chris Paul would be giving up so much money to go there. I think he stays in Phoenix.
Woody?
Mina, it doesn't matter about the finances. It matters about winning a championship. He's not going to the Knicks under any circumstances, but he tried to go to the Lakers about a decade ago. He's going to try it again.
Woody, you're the man who makes daily sports talk shows work with that argument point.
For 20 years.
Showdown 2, Dodgers-Giants last night. Wilmer Flores took Kenley Jansen out, and San Francisco beat the Dodgers late. Dodgers fans booed Jansen. Dave Roberts didn't like it. Woody, where do you come down on Dodgers fans booing Jansen?
There was no reason to boo this guy. He's had 333 saves for the Dodgers. He's gone through health problems the last few years, and this year he's blown 2 saves. That causes you to boo him? No. Go home early, as you always do.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with Woody. I think this is pretty weak, especially because, as you say, Kenley's been good this year. I know it hurts to lose to a rival like the Giants, but come on, have some patience. He's earned it.
Woody, another joke of yours where you're the only one laughing and you give us that. Woody, you're today's winner, and that's all I'm going to say about that.
The opening ceremonies of the Tokyo Olympics are tomorrow night, and there's been such a mess leading up to this. So many positive tests, so many firings of people who were executives for the Olympics. No fans going, only dignitaries. Why dignitaries? Why do they get the chance? I just hope it goes off successfully. As someone who's gone to 14 Olympics, I hope for the athlete's sake that it is okay and not a problem.
Thank you for that, Woody Page. Today's champion.